Hey friends, welcome to Flight Test. I'm Josh. Today we're going to be showing you how to build the new Mighty Mini Corsair. Now if you guys remember our Mini Corsair from the past, this is a new version 2 designed by our good friend John Overstreet. Now obviously you can see that there's a couple really cool features about this. There's no more poster board. Everything is molded and folded together, which is going to make this build experience really good, but also more durable than ever and also lighter. You're also going to notice that the size is physically bigger, but it does not compromise in any way about the performance with this. Now, we do have our Master Series Corsair, and a lot of people may think that this is just simply a shrunken down version of it, but it's far from that. This whole airplane has been redesigned and reconfigured to give us as much internal space as possible, but also make the build experience easier and more approachable than ever. This could easily be someone's very first build, and they could have a really good experience with it. Now, in the past, the Mighty Mini Corsair has oftentimes been a very difficult and challenging plane to fly. This plane has addressed all those key features, and with the lighter wing loading and also the larger size, it's incredibly docile but very capable both in aerobatics and also to be used as a trainer. There's a lot more vision lined up around this Mighty Mini Corsair and also a whole bunch of future Mighty Minis that are going to be coming out very quickly. There's a couple new things that we've done to make this airplane even more roomy than ever, and we're going to carry this theme through all of John's Mighty Mini designs. Mainly it's going to be around the front fuselage here and the lack of power pod. What we're doing now is we're actually cutting out a plywood piece that can have an external X mount. When you use this motor mount, you're going to be able to easily service your motor, but also you're going to get more airflow going through the airframe than ever before, which is going to make this airplane not only 3-cell capable, but 4-cell capable. We made sure when John designed this to have him design it in a way where we could put the FT Aura light board in, so even if this is your very first airplane, you could install the FT Aura light and have a great trainer experience, and then when you're ready, turn off the Aura light level assist mode and have amazing aerobatics and also be able to fly in higher wing conditions. All of our speedboat kits are made with our new maker foam, so now you'll be able to paint this up and make them beautiful like all of John's projects. Now there's a really special vision around the Mighty Mini line that John's designing here. We really want to go into our local hobby shops and give them a new business model and a new product that's going to help people get in the hobby, but also give you guys the ability to go out to your local brick and mortar hobby shops, support them, and have a place to gather. So we're going to use this Mighty Mini line to be able to bring product in there that's going to give them something really exciting and new to hopefully help their businesses out, and we're counting on you guys to help that. For that reason, we're not going to have free plans as of yet, but what we are going to have is a planned solution for you in the near future that's going to help you guys grow the hobby, support the hobby, and also protect the hobby. Now, if you guys would like to support us in this vision, make sure you get a speedboat kit, get your materials in order. I'm going to toss this to my friend John, and we'll get started.
We first need to construct a wing fixture. Remove these two parts from your kit. You'll also need a piece of scrap. I've got a piece of scrap foam. This could be a piece of wood. This could be a piece of cardboard. I have cut this down to 19 inches by 3 inches. If you've got a larger piece, simply draw out a rectangle that's 19 by 3. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be gluing one of these along the long edge and then one of them along the other. Add a heavy bead of glue all the way along the bottom edge. And I'm going to glue it right along the edge here. Give this a minute and a half to cool. I want to make sure that nothing shifts. Once that's done, let's do the same on the other side. Once this has had a chance to cool down, let's set the fixture off to the side and begin assembling the wing. To build the wing, you'll need to remove the following pieces from your kit. You will need the 4 wing skins, 2 foam spars, the 3 parts marked X1, X2, and X3, and this piece that's shaped like the wingtip. Let's begin by gluing parts X1, X2, and X3 together. We'll set the other parts off to the side. To glue these parts together, I'm first going to glue X2 onto the part labeled X1. I want to make sure that everything is lined up exactly, and once I'm happy with position, I'm going to apply glue to the part labeled X2. And we're going to add X3. Again, double check that everything is lined up correctly. Once the glue's had a chance to cool a little bit, you can set this off to the side to finish cooling down. Next, we're going to join the two center wing skins together. You'll see that I've got the outer two wing skins laid about 3 inches apart. When I glue the two halves together, I'm going to lay them on top where there's a space between the foam and the table. This will prevent this from sticking to the tabletop. I'm going to hold this in place for about 1.5 minutes. I want to make sure the glue has plenty of time to cool. Now that we've got the center section glued, we're going to turn our attention to the outer wing skin. First thing we're going to want to do is, using the backside of a razor blade, we're going to run it along the score here at the aileron. I want to make sure that the aileron will break free. Next, we're going to fold things over like this, and we're going to tear away the foam here towards the wingtip. Once we've got that torn away, we're going to add a bevel right along this leading edge. To create a bevel, I'm going to hold my razor blade at approximately a 45-degree angle and draw the blade towards me. Once we add that bevel, I'm going to open things up, fold the aileron back, and we're going to add a bevel all the way along the aileron. Next, I'm going to add a light bead of glue along the score here on the aileron, and I'm going to wipe away all the excess using a piece of scrap. I'm going to leave that in the open position while the glue cools down. Next, I'm going to add a second bevel along the leading edge. The bevel is going to come all the way out to the paper flap. Next, we're going to remove the paper between the leading edge and the aileron. Make sure you are removing paper from the side with the bevels. Once that's done, we're going to do the same on the other side. Now that the two wingtips are done, let's work on the center section. On the center section, we're going to be opening up a number of scores using the backside of a razor blade. We're going to be doing the scores here, 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 and here. Make sure and get them all. Once the scores have all been opened, let's begin by tearing away this outer edge on this side. You can also do the same thing right here. We'll flip it around and do the same on the other side. Once that's been done, we're going to tear away the paper between the leading edge and this score near the trailing edge. Once the paper's been torn away, we're going to fold things backwards like that, and I'm going to cut a bevel. Do the same on the other side. Next, we're going to flip it over and cut 2 more bevels. The last 2 bevels we need to cut are here in the center, one here and one here. Now that we've got all the scores opened up and all the bevels cut, we're going to add some shape to the upper wing skins. To add shape to the upper wing skin, I'm going to lay the foam side down on the tabletop. I'm going to place my hand on the foam and I'm going to draw it over the edge of the table. I'm applying a small amount of pressure with my right hand as I'm drawing the piece over the edge of the table. You can see how an airfoil shape is formed. Let's do the same thing on the other side. You can see that I'm spending a little bit more time here than I am here. That's because we've got a greater arc here at the leading edge of the airfoil. Okay, the shape looks good. We're going to do the same thing on the outer wing skins. Now that we've got shape added to all the wing skins, let's glue things together. When gluing the wing sections together, I'm going to apply a bead of glue where the paper meets the foam. When I line the two sections together, I'm going to line up this double line with this double line. I want to make sure that the wing isn't too far back or too far forward. My alignment looks good. I'm going to press and hold for about 1.5 minutes while that cools down. Once the glue's had a chance to cool, we'll flip it around and do the same thing on the other side. Once the wing assembly has been glued together, we're going to glue the accessory box into place. To glue the accessory box into place, first double check that everything is oriented correctly. You'll notice that I've got a knockout on this end. The knockout goes on the end with the upper wing skins. When positioning the accessory box, it's very important that it goes on perfectly square. You'll see a line here and a line over here. Make sure that your box is lined up with that line exactly. It's important that it's not twisted one way or the other. Take your time on this step. If the box is twisted, your wings will be a little bit twisted once they're installed onto the fuselage. Okay, so my position looks good. I'm going to apply a bead of glue all the way around this box on the inside. I want to make sure that I keep glue away from the scores. I'm double checking to make sure that my box isn't twisted. I'm going to hold this in place for a full 1.5 minutes. Once the glue's had a chance to cool down, we're going to mount the wing assembly onto the fixture. When placing your wing assembly on the fixture, make sure it's centered left and right. If it's not exactly centered, your inverted gull wing will be a little bit crooked. In order to lock this inverted gull shape into place, we need to fill the scores here and here with glue. To do that, I'm simply going to relax the wing, and you can see when I do that the score is open. I'm going to run a heavy bead of glue along all the scores. Using a piece of scrap, I'm going to push the glue down into those scores. And I'll quickly do the same on the other side. Once that's done, I'm going to check to make sure that I'm centered on my fixture, and I'm going to press down and hold for about 2.5 minutes. Be sure and leave plenty of time for the glue to cool down. This step is critical to ensure that the wings hold the correct shape. Once it's had a chance to cool down, I'm going to add a very heavy bead of glue here and here. I'll do the same on the other side. I want to double check to make sure that the wing is still centered on my fixture, and I'm going to hold this in place for 2.5 minutes while the glue cools down. Now that that's had a chance to cool down, we're going to add the foam spars. You'll notice on each of the foam spars there's one small square. We're going to tear away the paper from each of the squares. Once that's done, we're going to line up the square with the scores and push it down against the lower wing skin. The spar will fit between the two lines. Add a heavy bead of glue and glue the spar in place. While that's cooling down, I'm going to add a little bit of glue up here where the spar meets the box. And I'm going to hold this for about 1.5 minutes, and then we'll flip it around and do the same thing on the other side. Now that the glue has had a chance to cool down, let's add the wooden spars. I typically put them on the back of the foam spars, but you can put them on the front if you'd rather have them there. Fit looks good. Add a heavy bead of glue. I'll hold this in place for about 10 to 15 seconds, and then we'll flip it around and do the same thing on the other side. Once the wooden spars are glued in place, you can set the assembly off to the side. Let's work on the servos for the ailerons. For the ailerons, we're going to be using the Flite Test 5-gram servos. Normally for the aileron, we'd be using this single arm. But if you're using the Flite Test 5-gram servo, I want to modify this servo arm that's shaped like a plus. What we're going to do is we're going to cut 3 of the arms off. This one is quite a bit heavier duty than the single arm. This will take a lot of play out of the ailerons. To change this over to a single servo arm, simply trim off 3 of the 4 arms using snips. We will be doing this for all servos in this build. Once you get both the 4 ways cut down, go ahead and mount them onto the servos like I've done here using the short screws. Now we can install them onto the wing. To install the servo, you'll notice that my arm is facing downward. We're going to push the servo into the slot, and I'm going to rotate the servo arm to where it is horizontal. Once it's in the horizontal position, I'm going to lay the wing flat on the tabletop. With the servo and the wing flat on the tabletop, I'm going to run a bead of glue around the servo. I'm going to let this cool down for a full 2 minutes. I want to make sure that the servo doesn't shift position. Once that cools down, let's do the same on the other side. Now that the glue's had a chance to cool down, let's add a Y extension to the aileron servos. Double check that my colors are lined up correctly. Once that's done, I'm going to tape the connection. And I'll do the same on the other side. Once that's done, I'm going to add a small amount of glue right here and glue the wire in place. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. Now that that's done, let's remount our wing onto the fixture, and we're going to begin folding these upper wing skins back. Now that we've got the servos in place, we're going to be folding the upper wing skin over and gluing it in place. To complicate things just a little bit, we're going to be adding a barbecue skewer here on the leading edge. This is really going to improve durability of the aircraft. In order to get the barbecue skewer in, we're going to have to open up this channel just a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the wing assembly off the fixture, and I'm going to push down where this lower wing skin is flat on the table. Using my fixture, I'm going to slide it under the opposite edge, and that's going to help this lay flat. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the blunt end of a barbecue skewer, and I'm going to run it right along this channel. And it's going to open up the foam just a little bit. So let's do a test fold. I'm going to push the barbecue skewer up to where this edge meets up with this edge. I'm going to press the barbecue skewer down. I'm going to fold the upper wing skin over. When I fold the upper wing skin over, it's very important that it's not twisted one way or the other. I'm following the outermost score from the leading edge of the wing all the way to the trailing edge of the wing. So I'm going to visually check to make sure that it's lined up with that outermost score. Okay, once I'm happy with position, I'm going to open the assembly back up. I'm going to apply a heavy bead of glue right here on the leading edge, here on the spar, and then here across the trailing edge. I'm quickly going to insert the barbecue skewer. I want to be careful when pressing down not to get any glue on my fingers. I use a screwdriver to push it down. I'm going to fold the wing assembly back, and I want to check my alignment. Okay, everything looks good, so I'm going to hold this in place for a full 2 minutes while the glue cools down. Now we're going to do the same thing on the other side. On this step, we're going to be reapplying paper to the underside of the wingtip. If you intend to paint your aircraft, you'll probably want to add this paper. If you don't intend to paint your aircraft, you can just skip this step. I'm going to be using Aleene's original tacky glue. I really like this glue. It takes a couple hours for it to dry, so if you have to make any adjustments to the shape of the wing, this will allow plenty of time to do that. Even though it takes a long time to dry, once you get the paper glued in place, it doesn't shift unless you're trying to move it. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove a layer of paper from this wingtip. I'm going to be lifting the barbecue skewer just slightly and sliding this into place. Okay, my test fit looks good, so I'm going to go and just add glue all over the exposed surface. I want to make sure I've got an even coat over all the exposed foam. Once I've done that, I'm going to slide this up and under the skewer. I'll probably need to hold it for about a minute or two, and it'll take hold. Once the paper's stuck in place, we're going to pull this paper tab back and glue it in place. Now you'll notice that I've got a little bit of a tear there on the leading edge. I'm going to add a little bit more of a bevel right here along the leading edge. What I'm going to do is I'm going to apply some glue, and I'm going to press this wingtip against the tabletop. I'm going to push straight down, and I'm going to pull the tab back. And that's going to kind of fix that little tear we had on the leading edge. Apply a bead of glue there, and I'm going to apply a bead of glue here on the tab. Press the wingtip down and pull the tab over the barbecue skewer. I'm going to press down and hold this until the glue cools down. Once that's had a chance to cool down, I'm going to snip off the excess barbecue skewer. Now we're going to flip it around and do the same thing on the other side. If you have wrinkles on the paper that you reapplied, using your thumb, you can work them out like this. Next, we're going to work on the inner wing skins. Just like we did on the outer wing skins, we're going to add a section of barbecue skewer on the leading edge. First thing I want to do is cut the barbecue skewer to length. So I'm going to run it all the way down to the outer wing skin. And I'm going to mark it with my finger here towards the center. And I'm going to cut a section of barbecue skewer. Next, I'm going to place the barbecue skewer here on the leading edge. And we're gently going to fold this inner wing skin back. You'll notice that this paper lip here on the outer edge is going to be just on top of the outer wing skin. So when I fold it back, we have a nice clean edge. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the barbecue skewer out, and I'm going to apply a heavy bead of glue right here. I'm going to apply a heavy bead of glue right here, and then I'm going to apply a small bead of glue right along the corner. Okay, I'm going to insert my barbecue skewer and then fold the skin back. I'm going to hold this in place for a full 2 minutes. I want to make sure that this does not move. Once that's done, we're going to repeat the process on the other side. Once that's had a chance to cool down, I'm going to press down near the trailing edge, and I'm going to apply a bead of glue from the trailing edge all the way up to the leading edge. Once that cools down, I'll flip it over and do the same on the other side. It's okay if it's a little bit sloppy. This seam will be hidden inside the fuselage. Next, we need to apply a bead of glue where the lower wing skin meets the upper wing skin. We'll do it all the way across both sides. We can also fill this gap here and the one on the other side. Give that a couple minutes to cool down before going on to the next step. Using a servo centering tool, I've put the servos in their neutral position. Once I've done that, I'm going to run the Z-bend through the outermost hole on the servo arm. And I'm going to do a 90-degree bend right at the hinge. Once I do my 90-degree bend, I'm going to grab the portion of the wire pointed towards the center of the wing, and I'm going to bend it straight back. Cut off the excess. Using a barbecue skewer, I'm going to open up the slot for the control horn. I'm going to run the Z-bend through the hole in the control horn. Next, I'm going to put my aileron in the neutral position and drop my control horn in place. Okay, you'll notice that I'm even here at the back. I'm going to remove my control horn, put some glue right in the slot, and reinstall my control horn. I'm going to hold that in place for about 1.5 minutes. I want to make sure that the glue takes hold and my aileron doesn't shift. Then we'll flip it around and do the same thing on the other side. To further protect the servo arm, we're going to glue a guard in place. The guard is going to be glued parallel to the slot right here. I'm simply going to add a bead of glue, and I'm going to hold this in place for about 1 minute. Now I'll flip it around and do the same thing on the other side. On this step, I'm going to be mounting the elevator and rudder servos. If you only intend to run an elevator, you can just install one servo. You can see that I've already fed the wires through the hole. Now I'm simply going to push the servos down and check the fit. You'll notice that the heads of the servos are near the trailing edge of the wing. Make sure that you have your servos oriented this way. I'm going to push the servos out just slightly, and I'm going to apply a bead of glue onto the rear shelf. And a little bit of glue here on this front shelf. Now I'll reinstall the servos. While the glue's cooling down, I'm going to flip the assembly upside down and run the 2 wires up through the small square hole on top. Once this is done, you can set your wing assembly off to the side, and let's build the fuselage. To build the fuselage, remove the following parts from your kit. You'll need the tail section. This has the C3 label. You'll also need the F3 and F4 former, along with the longeron. To begin with, we're going to glue the F3 former to the F4 former. You'll see how I've got it lined up. I'm making sure that the holes are lined up and that it's centered left to right. When applying glue, I always like to apply glue to the smaller part. I want to make sure when applying glue to this F3 former that I keep the glue away from the holes and the dotted lines. I'm going to hold this in place for a few seconds, and then we're going to set this off to the side and begin working on the tail section. While that's cooling down, using the back side of a razor blade, I'm going to run down the score here, here, and the 2 on the other side. Once that's been done, I'm going to break it backwards and remove the scrap in the center. I'll do the same on the other side. Before going any further, I need to run a small bead of glue right down the center. Wipe away the excess. And while that's cooling down, I'm going to tear the paper off the side with the visible score line. For this next step, I want to ensure that my tabletop is free and clear of any glue buildup. Whenever we add shape with glue on the tabletop, it can create dents. So take a minute to make sure that your tabletop doesn't have any glue buildup. Once that's been done, we're simply going to take this and fold it right down the middle. Take your time on this step. You want to make sure that you don't create any dents or wrinkles. I'm going to hold this for a few seconds. I really want to make sure everything's breaking down right along that seam. Okay, once I've done that, I need to add a little bit of shape in this area right here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to run this over to the edge of the table and just add a little bit of pressure while drawing the part off the side of the table. And I haven't added much. It just takes just a little bit of shape to get the effect we're looking for. All right, once that's been done, we're going to do a B-fold. A B-fold is where the side plate is to the side of the bottom plate. We're going to apply a bead of glue from the tail end to about the halfway mark. Once I've added glue, I'm going to press straight down and allow that to cool. I'm going to let this cool for a full 2 minutes before doing the other side. Once that's done, let's do the same thing on the other side. Once that's had a chance to cool down, I'm going to apply glue all along this lower edge. When I bring the two sides together, I'm going to shingle the side that does not have glue over the side that does have glue. That'll push all the excess glue to the middle. Once my two edges come together with glue, I'm going to run a piece of tape across the seam. When bringing the two edges together, you'll see a little cutout right here. I'm going to make sure that it's lined up and that here on the end it's lined up. Put a piece of tape here in the middle. Bring it together here in the back. Run a piece of tape across here. And I'm going to do the same up front. Once that's had a chance to cool down, we're going to install the former. To install the F3 former, I'm going to start off by pinching the top and the bottom very gently. You can see as I pinch it that it opens up just a little bit side to side. It's a little bit snug going in, so I'm going to pull the former out and simply press down and roll it on the tabletop. All right, let's try that again. That goes in much better. When installing the former, you'll want to make sure that the crop mark is lined up here at the top. The F4 former will be flush across the leading edge of this tail section. Now I'm going to run a bead of glue all the way around the inside of the tail section. Once that's done, I'm quickly going to reinsert the former. Double checking to make sure that my crop mark is lined up. Also double checking to make sure that I've got exactly one layer of foam sticking out here at the front. I'm going to hold this closed for a couple minutes while the glue cools down. Then we're going to cut our slot for the longeron. To create the slot for the longeron, use a razor blade and connect the dashes. Once that's done, we're going to slide our longeron in. And we're going to push it in until this is flush with the former. Okay, that looks good, so I'm going to pull it out. And I'm going to apply a bead of glue here at the bottom and here on this small angle here at the back. If you have excess glue here at the bottom, you can remove it using a piece of scrap. Let's add a bead of glue here and a bead on the other side. Let's set this assembly off to the side and let's make our push rod housings. To build the push rod housings, we're going to run the push rod through a pair of coffee stirrers. Once we've got the push rod run through, I'm going to push the two stirrers together and connect them using a piece of clear tape. Next, I'm going to take and roll them. And that gives us a push rod housing. Let's make a second one now. Once that's done, we'll run them through the tail section. To install the push rod housings, I've removed the push rod. I'm going to feed the housing into the front and then catch it with the push rod here at the back. Once I've got it all the way pushed through, you'll see that I've got about 1/8 of an inch of the push rod housing sticking out. I'm going to add a bead of glue right along the slot. I'm also going to add a bead of glue up here at the front. Now notice I'm going to pull the push rod housing a little more horizontal. I'm going to hold this for a couple minutes while the glue cools down, then we'll flip it over and do the second one. To install the other push rod housing, I'm going to come in at a little bit of an angle. And just like I did before, I'm going to catch the push rod housing with the push rod and run it through. I'm going to add a bead of glue here. Before I add another bead of glue on the other end, I'm going to run my push rod through. Now I'm going to pull this slightly and apply a bead of glue down here at the front. Let this cool down for a minute or so before moving on. Once the glue is dried, cut the push rod housing about 4 inches from where it comes through the former. Be sure and use scissors for this step. Once that's done, let's set this assembly off to the side and begin working on the other fuselage sections. Go ahead and remove the fuselage section labeled C2 from your kit. We're going to break it open down the middle, apply a bead of glue, and glue that seam. As the glue's cooling down, let's remove the paper from this side. Once that's done, we're going to break this tab open and tear the foam away. This will leave us a big paper tab. Let's do the same on the other side. Once that's done, we're going to flip it over where the foam is against the table, and we're going to begin adding some shape. Let's begin by adding shape right down the middle of the fuselage. Once we've got shape added to the center, I'm going to begin working on this tab and this tab. I'm also going to add just a little bit of shape right here. We don't need to spend as much time as we did right here. Also add a little bit of shape to this one and the one on the other side. All right, once that's done, I'm going to fold it up like this and run a piece of tape right across the center. My opening is about 3 inches across. It isn't critical if it's off just a little bit one way or the other. Once that's done, we're going to glue these two edges together. Add a small bead of glue to one side, and I'm going to shingle over the side with glue with the side that doesn't have glue. Run a piece of tape across that. Let's set this part off to the side to cool down, and let's form up our battery box. To form up the battery box, we're going to go down each of the scores using the backside of a razor blade. Once that's done, you can tear away the scrap. Once that's done, we're going to fold it up using B folds. While that's cooling down, I'm going to fold this skinny piece over. Again, it's a B fold. I'll apply some glue. Do it here on this side and here on the top. Let's hold this for about 1.5 minutes before moving on. On this step, we're going to glue the F2 former to the wooden former. I'm going to line up the crop mark at the top to the crop mark here at the top on the wooden former. We'll let that cool for a few seconds. Once it's stuck, you'll see here on the battery box it reads top. That's going to go here where we've got the marking F2. Let's do a test fit. Next, I'm going to run a bead of glue around the edge here. And I'm going to push straight down. I'm going to check it out on the inside to make sure that it's down on all sides. Once that's done, I'm going to run a bead of glue all the way around the perimeter. This part can be set off to the side while the glue cools down. On this step, we're going to add the extension to the longeron. The two halves are just going to be glued together like so. Hold this in place for a couple minutes while the glue cools down. Then we're going to be installing the fuselage skin. To connect the two main sections, we're going to slide the longeron underneath the tape. I'm going to roll the whole assembly over, and you can see that I've got the tail section flat on the table. This front section is hanging off the edge of the table. There's a crop mark right up here at the front. I want to make sure that that is lined up with this crop mark here at the top. I'm looking to make sure that my seam looks good here and on the other side. Once I'm happy with the fit, I'm going to apply a bead of glue just over 1 inch long across this center section. I'm also going to run glue from about here to about here, which is about 2 inches. Once I've got my glue added, I'm going to slide it back into place, and I'm going to squeeze and hold. I've got a couple pieces of tape here on standby. I'm going to pull the tape across the seam. Make sure my seam is looking good, and then I'm going to run my tape across. Up here at the front, I want to make sure that my longeron is centered. So I'm going to hold that in place while the glue cools down. Let this cool down for a full 2.5 minutes before moving on. Once that's had a chance to cool down, I'm going to run a bead of glue from about here to here. I've got a couple pieces of tape here on standby. I'm going to pull the tape across the seam. Once I get the tape in place, I'm going to run a bead of glue from here all the way up here to the corner. You can see I'm going to run my piece of tape diagonally and then wrap it around the bottom of the fuselage. And do the same process on the other side. Give this a couple minutes to cool down. I'm going to run a bead of glue right down this center line. Once I run that bead of glue, I'm going to glue the longeron to the skin right down the center. I'm going to hold this in place for a couple minutes. I want to make sure this is good and stuck. On this step, we're going to slide the battery box into place. We need to align the slot on the battery box with the slot on the longeron. This is a little bit tricky to do. I'm pushing down just slightly on the battery box. You'll notice that I've got the front half of my fuselage resting on the table, and this step down is hanging off the side of the table. I'm pressing down just slightly on the back of the battery box as I'm pushing it in. Now the tricky part is to make sure that this former goes in properly. If you run into too much issue, you can always cut this seam. That'll make it a little bit easier to slide in place. Sometimes they drop right in, sometimes they don't. This one's giving me trouble, so I'm going to open this seam up. With that seam opened up, I can easily slide the battery box in place. You'll notice that the tabs from that longeron extension fit really well whenever the battery box is in the proper position. You'll notice that the wood is flush with the edge of this skin. I want to make sure that my crop mark is lined up to this crop mark. The fit on this is really critical. This gives us the proper thrust angle. Now that the battery box is in position, I'm going to add glue right here on this tab and right here on this tab. I'm also going to run a bead of glue between the longeron and the box. You can see I added quite a bit of glue. We'll give that a couple minutes to cool down. Once that's had a chance to cool down, let's get everything here in the front glued up. I'm going to run a bead of glue right where the wood former meets the skin. I'll wipe away the excess. And I'm simply going to push straight down onto the tabletop while the glue cools. Once the glue cools, continue to work your way around. Be sure and wipe away any excess glue. Included with your kit is a gauge. We're going to drop this gauge in right here where this step is. We're going to very gently squeeze the sides until the sidewalls make contact with the battery box. We're going to run a bead of glue between the battery box and the skin. Hold this for a full 2.5 minutes while the glue cools. Once that's done, you'll do the same on the other side. Once that's had a chance to cool down, we're going to wrap the tabs from the outside of the fuselage to the inside of the battery box. Add some glue. And I'm going to fold it over. It'll be a little bit hot, so you can use a piece of scrap to help you fold it over. Do the same on the other side. Once that's done, I'm going to flip this around. And we need to join these two halves together. I'm first going to tear off a piece of tape. I'm going to lay it across one side and fold it back just before the edge. I'm going to apply a bead of glue and bring the two halves together. Looks like I'm not quite even, so I need to break my tape loose and realign it. We're going to let that cool down, and then we're going to test fit our wing. Before installing the wing, I first want to take a minute and show you how I'm holding on to the fuselage. You'll notice that the fuselage here on the front section has a rib running all the way down. We're going to be resting this portion of the fuselage on the tabletop. So you'll notice that this area that drops down is going to be hanging off the edge of the table. Over here, I'm going to be holding the fuselage right here where this seam is. I've got a former in there, so there's very little risk of me creating any wrinkles while I'm applying pressure to the fuselage. Once I've got the fuselage positioned, I'm going to slide the wing assembly underneath the pushrod housings. And we're going to slide it all the way back until the front end drops down. With the wing in this position, I can press straight down and I don't have to worry about crinkling anything. My test fit looks good. Next, I'm going to pull the wing assembly back out. And now we're going to apply glue along the box edge here, here, and then here in the center. I'll slide my wing assembly back in. I want to check up here at the front and make sure that I've got my wing assembly centered left to right. Once I'm happy with position, I'm going to push straight down and I'm going to hold things in place for a full 2 minutes. I want to make sure that glue has ample time to cool down. Before we go any further, I'm going to do a final trimming on our pushrod housings. I'm going to clip them about 1/4 inch from the foam. I'm going to slide my pushrod back, cut them, and then run my pushrod back through. Do the same on the other side. Once that's done, we'll flip the assembly back over and glue the top side of the wings to the fuselage. Once the glue's had a chance to cool down, I'm very gently going to squeeze the fuselage until it makes contact with the wing. Once it makes contact, I'm going to run a light bead of glue right along the seam. I'm going to hold this in place for about 2 minutes and then flip it around and do the same thing on the other side. Now that's had a chance to cool down, let's work on the vertical and horizontal stabilizer. If you're not going to run a rudder, you can simply pry this open just a little bit, add a bead of glue in here, and that'll give you a fixed rudder. If you're going to be running a rudder like we're going to be doing, you can take the back side of a razor blade and run down this score. Let's also do it here in the front. I'm going to tear off the foam here in the front. This is going to give us a tab. I'm going to glue a barbecue skewer here on the leading edge of the vertical stabilizer. We're going to bead of glue right there and then one close to the edge. The one close to the edge is a little bit lighter. I'm going to roll it over to close it. Next, I'm going to fold the rudder over and I'm going to cut a bevel along the rudder. Once that's done, I'm going to run a small bead of glue. I'm going to open the rudder all the way up and remove all the excess glue. I'm going to leave that open until the glue fully cools down. While that's cooling down, using the back side of a razor blade, let's go down the scores on the horizontal stabilizer. Let's pull the foam away here in the front. We're going to add a bead of glue right where the paper meets the foam, and then a small bead of glue near the edge. I'm going to fold it over and then fold it flat. As it goes flat, I'm going to draw it across the table. Okay, let's do the same thing on the other side. Once that's done, we're going to fold this over and we're going to cut a bevel all the way along the the elevator. Now we're going to run a bead of glue. And wipe away all the excess using scrap. Check and make sure I don't have any big globs of glue. Give that about a minute or so to cool down. Next we're going to cut the slot in the tail section. To cut the slot for the horizontal stabilizer, I'm going to hold my razor blade really flat and connect the dashes. Now that that's done, let's test fit the horizontal stabilizer. You'll notice on the horizontal stabilizer, you've got a crop mark here, 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 and here. When we slide this in, you can use those crop marks to square everything up. When looking at the horizontal stabilizer from the back, we may need to twist it one way or the other. We're going to add a bead of glue on either side. Once we add that bead of glue, we'll be able to hold it in place while the glue cools. While the glue's cooling down, I'm watching to make sure that the horizontal stabilizer is level. In order to install the vertical stabilizer, we're going to run the barbecue skewer into the hole here on the top and out through the slot on the bottom. You'll notice that we pass the skewer right through the slot. There's a crop mark here at the back. Once I'm happy with position, I'm going to run a bead of glue down either side. And make sure it's centered here at the back. I'll hold this in place for about a minute and a half. Once that's had a chance to cool down, I'm going to cut off the excess. And I'll put a small bead of glue where the barbecue skewer is coming through the skin. Once this is done, we're going to hook up the elevator and the rudder. With the servo in the neutral position, I'm going to run the Z-bend through the outermost hole of the servo arm. Do the same on the other side. Once the servo arms are in place, I'm going to add the short screw. I'll do the same on the other side. Once that's done, let's add a Z-bend to the other end of the wires. To make a Z-bend, I'm going to grab the wire right at the hinge. I'm going to bend the wire straight out. Next, I'm going to grab the wire that's pointing out and bend it straight back. Once that's done, I'm going to cut off the excess. Using a barbecue skewer, I'm going to open up the slot for the control horn. I'm going to run the Z-bend through the hole in the control horn. Drop it in the slot. And I'm going to set the elevator to neutral. Once I'm happy with position, I'm going to pull the control horn out, add a bead of glue, and reinsert the control horn. I'm going to hold it in place while the glue cools down. I want to make sure that the elevator stays in the neutral position. To do the Z-bend for the rudder, I'm going to push the wire down to where it's lined up with the slot. I'm going to grab the wire right at the hinge, and I'm going to bend it straight up. Once I make the first bend, I'm going to grab the wire pointing straight up and bend it straight back. And I'm going to cut the wire about 1/4 inch from the bend. Just like before, I'm going to open up the slot using a barbecue skewer, run the Z-bend through the hole in the control horn, and test fit the control horn. I want to make sure that the rudder is in the neutral position. Add some glue to the slot and reinsert the control horn. Hold this in place till the glue has a chance to cool. To build the canopy, remove the parts labeled T1, T2, and T3 from your kit. Begin by removing paper from the side with the label. Once the paper's been removed, let's add some shape to the part labeled T1. To add shape, I'm going to draw the canopy down and around. I always want to make sure I've got a 90-degree angle between the part and the table. Next, I want to add some shape to T3. Most of my shape is going to be right down the center between my fingers. Once we've got the shape we want, we're going to glue T1 to T3 like I'm doing here. And bring the two edges together. The side that does not have glue will shingle over the side that does have glue. I'm going to hold this together for about 30 seconds and then add a piece of tape across the seam. Once I've got my tape in place, I'm going to glue the other side. I'll add a piece of tape when I can. Once I get my tape in place, I can set the part off to the side. I'm going to add a bevel all the way around the part labeled T2. We need to add a little bit of shape to this part. I'm simply going to take and bend it using my fingers. Next, I'm going to drop T2 into this opening. Once I'm happy with the test fit, I'm going to add a bead of glue. I'll drop the part in. I'm going to hold this in place while the glue cools down. Then we're going to add a bevel. To add a bevel, I'm going to be holding my razor blade nearly vertical here along the sides. As I make my way around to the front, my razor blade is going to be more horizontal. And as I move all the way around, it'll go almost back to vertical again. Once I've got my bevel cut, let's test fit the canopy onto the fuselage. So I'm simply going to line up the crop mark here in the rear and the crop mark here at the front. You'll see here in the back there's a small step. This is a little bit higher than this. Once I'm happy with the test fit, I'm going to apply a bead of glue near the edge and a little bit of glue here on the back. You can see I'm favoring the inside when applying glue to the back. Check, make sure my crop marks are lined up. And as I'm holding the canopy down, I'm making sure that it is making contact with the fuselage. You'll want to hold the canopy in place for a full 2 minutes. To build the accessory cover, you're going to need the following parts. You'll need the accessory cover itself and the tabs labeled A1 and A2. Let's begin by using the backside of a razor blade and running it down the scores on the accessory cover. Once we've gone down each of the scores, break the tabs over and peel the foam away. Next, we need to cut bevels from here all the way to the back. We also need to cut a bevel here at the front. This tab will not get a bevel. Let's do the same on the other side. Once that's been done, let's go ahead and peel the paper away. Now we need to add a bit of shape to the accessory cover. This is done the same way we did the wings. Just going to apply even pressure and draw it over the side of the table. I'm using my fingertips to give it a little bit more of a round shape. All right, once that's done, we're going to fold these tabs up and glue them. I'm going to run a bead of glue here where the paper meets the foam, and then a second bead of glue near the edge. Do the same here. We have to go to the edge of the table so that tab can hang down. I'm going to stand it straight up, fold it all the way over, and draw it. Again, drawing it across the table prevents the glue from sticking to the tabletop. Do the same here. Let's do the same here up at the front. And we'll do these other tabs as well. Once that's done, using a barbecue skewer, we're going to pop out these two circles. Once that's been popped up, we're going to take two 10mm magnets and glue 2 of them into each hole. I want to use quite a bit of glue. I don't want these things to come loose. Once I've got them glued in place, I'm going to put an X on each of them. All right, I'm going to set this off to the side, and while that's cooling down, I'm going to pop circles out of the tab with the A2 label. Next, I'm going to put glue in both of the pockets. And I'm going to pop the top magnet loose. When I glue this magnet in place, I want that X to be in the glue. I've got 2 small pieces of clear tape. I'm going to lay over the magnets and wrap around. This will ensure the magnets stay in place. Cut off the excess tape. Next thing I want to do is run a bead of glue down one side of A1. This is going to glue to the accessory cover. We'll give this a minute or so to cool down, then we'll do a test fit on the underside of our aircraft. Now we need to insert the tab marked A2. In order to do that, I'm first going to take a barbecue skewer and run it right between the servos. I'm going to slide the A2 tab along the top of the barbecue skewer, and I'm going to push it in until it's even with the two crop marks there behind the magnets. All right, so we're going to be gluing it in place like that. Now that we've done a test fit, I'm going to pull it out and apply a bead of glue. I'm going to push down slightly on the barbecue skewer, and that'll push it up against the foam. Looks like I got a little bit of excess glue. I'm going to wipe that away using a piece of scrap. Be sure and let that cool completely before moving on. Next, I want to put a little bit of glue between the tab and the pushrod housing. Flip it over and do the same on the other side. We'll let that cool down, and then we're going to try a test fit on our door. When test fitting the accessory cover, there's a couple things that we're going to be checking. One, I want to make sure that we've got the correct shape. I want to make sure that we've got enough curve here at the back. Also, we're going to be checking to make sure that this opening is okay. We might need to squeeze it closed a little bit more. We'll know as soon as we test fit the accessory cover. To test fit it, we're going to slide this tab in. We're going to squeeze it here at the back, and these tabs are going to drop down in the slots on the underside of the wing. You'll notice here that over here on this side, my accessory door looks good. Here, this looks like it's sprung open just a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop this accessory cover off, and we're going to squeeze this closed just slightly and apply a bead of glue right where the side meets this block. I'm going to add a heavy bead of glue here and a heavy bead of glue here. And I'm going to gently squeeze this closed and hold it while the glue cools down. You'll want to hold this for a full 2.5 minutes. Now that I've got that glued in place, let's check the fit one more time. There you can see it's a little more even now. All right, that looks good. Let's add the nose trim, and then we're going to install the motor. To finish out the nose, remove this piece from your kit. We'll start by removing paper from one side. It doesn't matter which. Once we've got the paper removed, flip the part over where the foam is against the table, and let's cut a bevel here on the back edge. Once we've got the bevel cut, we're going to add shape to the part. You can see that I'm drawing it over the edge of the table and pushing it down with my thumb. I always want to make sure that I'm maintaining a 90-degree angle between the table and the part. Once I've added shape, I'm going to line up this edge to the center line here down the middle. I'm going to glue this on in about 25% increments. I want to check to make sure my fit looks good. That looks nice. Add some glue. Line up my edge to the seam. And I'm going to hold this in place while the glue cools down. So I got a little excess. I'm going to wipe that away with some scrap. I'll hold that in place while it cools. Once it does, I'll continue to make my way around. Now that that's done, let's install the motor onto the firewall. To install the motor, we'll first attach the motor to the firewall. Two screws is all you're going to need to secure the motor. Once that's done, connect your ESC. The order of the wires do not matter at this point. Let's test motor direction. What we want is we want the motor turning counterclockwise as we're looking at it. I'm going to use a servo tester to test motor direction. Looks like our motor is turning the wrong way, so I'm simply going to switch any two of the wires. Let's test it again. That looks good. Next, we're going to install the firewall onto the nose of the aircraft. To install the motor, I'm first going to start each of the 4 wood screws. I want them just coming out the back side. Once I've got all 4 screws started, I'm going to push the ESC and the wires all the way in, and I'm simply going to line up the screws to each of the holes. Once all 4 screws are in, let's bind the receiver and program the electronics. Next, we need to run the ESC wire through this small opening up here by the servos. I've already run a piece of Pushrod through the opening. I've made a hook down here on the other end. I'm going to run the hook through the ESC wire. And then I'm going to pull on the Pushrod, bring the ESC wire up through the opening. Now that I've got my ESC wire run through, we can begin binding the receiver. For this setup, we're going to be using the Spectrum DX6E. To bind the receiver, we first need to create a new model. To create a new model, we simply hit the clear and the back button at the same time. We're going to scroll down to add new model and hit select. Slide over to create, hit select. And we're going to scroll down to where it says bind, and we're going to hit select. I'm going to scroll over to bind. Now let's connect the battery. First, I'm going to connect my battery to the ESC. Next, I'm going to hold down my bind button and plug my ESC wire into the number 1 slot. You'll notice that the orange light is blinking. That means it's in bind mode. Next, I'm going to hit bind and move the transmitter at least 3 feet away from the receiver while it's binding. Our bind was successful. Let's get started with setup. Now that we've got our receiver bound, let's plug in our ailerons. The ailerons will go into the slot marked 2. Next, we're going to do our elevator into slot 3, and our rudder goes into slot 4. Once that's done, let's check servo direction. Now we're going to check servo direction. Let's start with the elevator. When I pull the right stick back, we want the elevator to go up. Okay, that's correct. Next, I'm going to move the stick over to the right. We want the aileron to go up. Okay, that's correct. And let's check the rudder. When I move the stick to the left, the rudder ought to go to the left, and when I move it to the right, it ought to go to the right. All right. We do have the correct movement, but it looks like I've got a little bit of binding going on right here. So I'm going to take a control rod and run it underneath. This will flatten some of that paper out. Okay, that got rid of most of the interference, but what would happen if our elevator or our rudder was reversed? I'll show you how to change that now. I'm going to hit the select button, and I'm going to scroll down to servo setup and hit select. I'm going to scroll over to travel and hit select, and I'm going to scroll through to reverse. I'll hit the select button and scroll over to, let's do the elevator. Let's switch it. If I scroll over to elevator and hit select, that's going to reverse it. So now when I pull back, you can see that it's going down. So that's how you reverse your servos if you have that issue. I'm going to switch it back and back out. Trim-wise, all our control surfaces look pretty good. Our rudder is off to the right just barely. Let's go through and change the sub-trim. Here in the servo setup menu, I'm simply going to hit select. I'm going to scroll over to travel and hit select. I'm going to scroll over to sub-trim and hit select. I'm going to scroll over to rudder and hit select. And I'm going to rotate my wheel until my rudder is perfectly straight. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to hit select and back out. Everything looks good. Let's get the receiver glued in place, and then we're going to remove the tape. To secure the receiver, I'm simply going to apply a small amount of glue to the back of the receiver and glue it in place. Once that's done, I'm going to shove all the wires up inside the fuselage. Once that's done, let's remove tape from the aircraft. Once the tape's been removed, you can put a piece of Velcro in the battery box. I'm going to reinstall the cover. Now we just need to install the prop. The last step we need to do is install the prop. I'm going to double check that I've got a counterclockwise prop. I'm going to slide it on and cinch the prop nut down. Once the prop's done, Our aircraft is finished and ready to fly. One last thing I want to point out before you put your aircraft up in the air, it's imperative that you have a couple degrees of down thrust and a couple degrees of right hand thrust. Now we've designed the kit to have the correct thrust angle built into it, but sometimes when the aircraft goes together and when you're all finished up, you don't have the correct thrust angle. So if you don't visibly have a couple degrees of down thrust and a couple degrees of right hand thrust, you can simply loosen the screw here and here. You'll want to put a couple washers between the two wooden pieces and then tighten everything back down. Having the correct down thrust is really going to make your flying experience a lot better.